Before we get started on this, I want to disconnect the battery because we're dealing with the airbag. We're going to have to disconnect it, and it's not good to have that unplugged when the battery is connected because it could accidentally set it off. So lift up this cover here. You'll find the battery underneath. I want to disconnect that terminal right there. That's the negative. With a 10mm socket, loosen up this nut here. Now lift up the terminal. Sometimes it gets stuck because of corrosion, so you're going to have to kind of work its way out. Perfect. Set this aside so it does not make contact with the battery. And at this point, you would want to wait about 10 to 15 minutes so that the capacitors can discharge for the airbag system. You can help speed the process along by flashing the high beam switch, pressing the horn, activating different electronics such as the wipers. And that might sound ridiculous, but it actually does discharge capacitors faster because even though nothing's happening, it tries to pull current from capacitors that stay charged up for the airbag. 15 minutes later, I'm inside the vehicle. I have two picks. I'm going to put one on each side, one in this hole, and as you press it, you'll feel that it unlocks this side of the airbag. At the same time, stick another pick on the other side, press that in. There we go. Pull at the same time. That releases the airbag. Remove your two picks. Take a small screwdriver and lift up on these tabs here. That will unlock the two connectors. Now you can press on the tabs that are on each side, and the connector should want to come up. There we go, that's one. And that's two. Set this aside safely. Now at this point you want to make sure your steering wheel is as straight as possible. You don't want it to be crooked to one side or the other. And you can see on this steering shaft right here, there's a notch, a line cut out here. And then on the top right here under this bracket, you can't see it very well, but there's also a little bump. And that bump has to line up with this line at the end. That's how you know that you've put on your steering wheel straight and lined up with the splines on this steering shaft. So let's get a tool and get that nut off. 21mm socket, remove this nut. At this point you can take the steering wheel, and this one came off easy. Sometimes they are a little bit more difficult to remove, but just wiggle it back and forth. Now that this is off, we can disconnect these two connectors. There's a tab in there that you can lift up on, and this connector comes undone. These wires pull out. Set your steering wheel aside. Underneath this cover here, you'll have 3 7mm bolts. They're difficult to see, but definitely accessible. Remove those. Now you can separate the two halves. Take the top one off. And you don't have to remove this bottom one completely. You can just pull it down a little bit. That'll expose the 4 screws that are holding on this clock spring. Remove all 4 screws with a Phillips head screwdriver. From the back side, you have 2 connectors here. Pop those off. Well, this is the lock. Push down on this and remove it. Then you have this blue one. For this one, you can use a pick or a screwdriver. Lift up this tab that locks it in and disconnect that. And there's your old clock spring. Take your new clock spring, line it up. I'm going to go ahead and connect it in. Make sure the connectors get pressed all the way, and don't forget the lock. Start in the 4 mounting screws. Snug them up. Let's put this top trim piece back on. Make sure it snaps into place. Put the 3 7mm screws back. Take your steering wheel, put the 2 connectors for the airbag through. And at this point, you're going to have to pull this retainer, just make sure the clock spring doesn't twist in any way. This is to hold it in during shipping. Reconnect your blue wire for the steering wheel buttons. Now you can line up the steering wheel with the steering shaft as well as the clock spring. Okay, right there. If you are one tooth off, you'll know because, like I said earlier, that line won't match up with the little notch. Let's get the nut back on. Torque this nut to 30 foot-pounds. Right there. Everything's still perfectly lined up. Reconnect your two airbag connectors. The pink clip goes to the pink connector. Press it on and lock it. And the white one goes to the white one. Press that one on, make sure it clicks, and lock it. To reinstall this, you have these two steel pins. They have to line up with the two large holes that are in the steering wheel. Tuck these cables behind so they don't get pinched. Line it up and press it on. You hear it snap into place. That's exactly what you want. At this point, you can reconnect your battery. Yes, I know the terminal has corrosion on it. I'll fix it later. Make sure the terminal is seated down on the battery all the way and snug it up. Make sure that's nice and tight. Reinstall this battery cover. And for me, this computer came unhooked from the little tabs here, so just slide it back on if it did for you as well.